Welcome, game dev adventurers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking with Corina Diaz about why early marketing matters in games.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. As always, I'm your host, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster here at the Indie Game Academy, and joining me today is none other than Corina Diaz. Corina has been a longtime partner and friend to IGA, has worked with us on a number of different things, has also been a professor for us, and is just a very smart person in the industry. Corina, welcome to the show. What are you having for lunch today?
My goodness. Tea, caffeine, chocolate. I mean, we're hot off the Easter Bunny visiting, so
There's too
nothing
much.
healthy.
Yeah, all right. There's too much sweets in the house at this point. This is where it all goes
Typical
downhill.
marketing people. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So that's your first tip, everybody. If you want to market successfully in indie games, you have to eat an unhealthy mix of Easter candy and caffeine. Thank you for that first hot tip, Karina. Welcome to the show, Karina. It is absolutely lovely to have you on and to pick your brain and to learn about you. Before anything else, I would love, especially for those who don't know you as well as I do or the IGA team does, to get your origin story. So tell us about where you are today in the game industry and how you got there.
Yeah, gladly. I mean, I've been in the game industry for an amazing 8 years, and that seems amazing, especially because it was over COVID, which, as we all know, kind of rocked the industry in a weird way. I mean, prior to games, I was still in entertainment. I went through bouts of indie music stuff and food blogging before I made my way to sort of things that transferred over nicely, like television and media and anime. Anime is like my proudest moment, I think, that I got to work for some anime companies.
So cool.
Yeah, super fun. I'm a big nerd, and if you can't tell from my background, yeah. But all of it really was piecing together community and marketing strategy, which when I first started, because I'm a little bit older, was kind of a new thing. Like Facebook wasn't even around when I first started doing this with brands. But obviously social media came like rolling in. And when I joined games about 8 years ago, it was, although I'd advised around some games projects with larger IPs, I did join full time with an indie studio. So I always think of myself as kind of an indie game developer. We can debate whether marketing is part of development maybe another day. But I will just stand firm that
We
it
don't need
is.
to debate that. It is a part of development. All right.
Nicely. I
Moving
mean,
on.
we're with good people here.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so since then, I mean, that was a studio called Lightning Rod Games is who I started with. They put out a fold apart, really lovely, award-winning game. Got to do some very cool stuff for like a noob in the industry.
Mhm.
But since then, I've been able to work with, over a dozen different studios on over like 15 titles in different kind of forms of marketing consultancy. My day job, which most people probably know me from, in addition to an IGA professor, is being marketing director at Mighty L. So we made the big con. We're currently working on All Systems Dance. Everybody go wish list it, please.
It looks awesome.
Thanks. And we've done a few other really cool things in the meantime. The coolest part about, I think, my origin story is the fact that, and I imagine there's people in the crowd who feel the same way. I never really felt like I could work in games when I was younger. It was not like something that I thought would be realistic. I think everyone low-key aspires to make games. Like everyone wants to be creative and they have like an experience in their brain they want to give to other people.
Mhm.
Um, but, I think partially being a woman and partially just like, again, the age that I grew up in was a little harsher around that. And the fact that the games industry was different back then. Like indie gaming was not like a thing that people understood as a viable path to success. So I think, as much as I've been kind of in marketing and community forever, and it feels like it was a very natural path, or some people look at it that way. I didn't go to school for this. I went to school for English. I was a teacher in another life. I always joke about that, but like teaching little kids. And yeah, and games is something that I kind of fell into as a result of, you know, basically people needing marketing for games. And
Mhm.
most people who are game developers don't get into games to do marketing. So there
Mhm.
was like a
Mhm.
lovely little pocket to fill. But yeah, that's kind of how I got here.
Amazing. Can you give us a little bit more detail on how you landed that very first games job? How did that like happen?
For sure. So I mentioned that I had sort of consulted on some games projects. So
Mhm.
I was working at an agency that was very traditional marketing. a high-end agency, like big clients, but not anything to do directly with games. But those two anime clients that I mentioned had started looking at mobile game experiences and sort of gamifying their websites a little
Mhm.
bit. So I had started applying to game jobs because I really enjoyed that. That's how I figured it out. I almost joke that it was like being part of a game jam because we were in these corporate environments where no one took us seriously, and we were pitching things that now are pretty standard experiences, like on Crunchyroll, who bought Funimation and Manga Entertainment, who is who I used to work for. But like back then, it was treated a bit like a joke. So it was very natural for me, once I realized that I liked it, to look for an indie partner who wouldn't treat it like
Mm,
a joke because it was their main thing. So yeah, so I just started looking for indie jobs very actively online, applying to many, not getting any kind of response from many. I heard often in the responses that people thought I was like either overqualified or like qualified in an industry that didn't make sense to them because it was like,
mm,
again, agency boutique marketing. I was like, what? Why would you want to work here? Was sort of the question I got asked a lot. So the indie agency, or sorry, the indie studio, Lightning Rod Games, who I did work with, I think when I finally did get that interview and they called me, we kind of both understood that we were taking a risk. Me in terms of like a totally different field and a totally different industry, them in terms of like an indie game project that always has inherent risk built in.
mm.
But we were both really upfront and candid about that. And I dare say that like it's not that you can't get a job in AAA just like riding on passion and like that kind of, connection, but indie developers always get it, like pretty much
Mhm.
always get it. They may not hire you as a result of that, but they appreciate that. So if you're someone who's
'Cause they
coming
may
to
not
you
have
for
the money to hire you, but
well, and honestly, that was the big sort of question when I left what I was doing and got into games. It was a very different structure. You're to a degree starting from the bottom up, although obviously it depends on your skill set and like
Mhm,
not everyone gets paid the same in games. But I think being open to taking that pay cut for the opportunity that it presented, which was my door into games, was a luxury that I could afford. Like, let's be honest. I also think that like some of the studios that I spoke to initially were not full-time positions, they were part-time, and I was entertaining the idea of doing it probably again, like many of people in the audience, doing it kind of like part-time or as a side hustle, because I was just really curious about it. And I think,
mhm,
games is one of those rare industries where people are very driven by that kind of thing. You'll talk to many indies who will admit like they're not planning on making money. They just want to like get this thing out in front of people. Um, and honestly, again, that's where like the marketing like niche came into play. It's like, even if you don't want to make money, you still want people to play your game.
mhm,
So yeah, so I spoke to a lot of people who thought it was like too expensive to work with me or just thought it wouldn't make sense to like promote a game that was just like a passion project.
mhm,
Um, and I think my door in was transferring skills in a meaningful way for them.
mm.
And game developers are just like a different type of people. They're
Mhm,
lovely, but I always joke that I think of them as artists. Everyone,
mhm.
engineers, programmers, every single
Oh,
one of them,
yes.
because they have that vision and like many of them, even though they obviously want to have a job and like make things, they honestly aren't driven by money or profit, most of them.
Mhm.
Um, I'm generalizing, but like in my experience, this
Yeah.
is very true. And yeah, I think a lot of people when they're interviewing for a job maybe it's not that they forget who they're talking to, but like understanding that person's needs and their perception, especially as a marketing person, is incredibly important. You're showing them that you can like be responsive and fill in needs that they probably don't want to fill themselves. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so I think that's how I landed my first job, truthfully.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot that you can pull out of that. I think, first of all, just to comment, marketers are game developers. The definition of game developer is somebody who develops a game, and that just means contributes to the building of the game, which absolutely marketing does, or at least the best marketers do. Not even the best, good marketers do. Besides that, though, I love that you sort of started in games adjacent, and that you came in with. I agree, a mentality that I think a lot of game developers and especially indie developers hold, which is this is not necessarily for money. This is a passion. I would love this to be for money. I would love this to be the thing that pays my way, but I'm mostly here because I just want to make games. And I think that sentiment, by the way, still carries up into AAA. It's just that, of course, AAA is quite competitive, and can have its own sort of burdens. I think also the just an echo that everybody can learn from here. So much about landing jobs in this point in time in the game industry, or landing any kind of work, whether it's just contract or even volunteer work, is all about personal relationships. You sort of built your street cred in a space that could be argued applies to games, and then you had some conversations, pretty frank conversations, it sounds like, until you landed that first job. So I think that's all a wonderful call out. Now, I want to jump into our topic of the day because this is something that I have learned so much from you about. The Indie Game Academy has learned so much from you about. Our Foundry program literally operates in certain ways because of the advice that you've given us here. The topic of the day is why early marketing matters. So, could you give us your 101? Why does early marketing matter in the indie game space?
I think truthfully, and this is like I'm trying to remove my bias because obviously I'm going to say marketing matters. It's my job. Um, but kind of removing that, I would make a case that every developer is kind of doing early marketing anyways, in the process of figuring out what you're going to make and defining it and figuring out the type of people who might play it and who your competitors are. Like all of that research, which goes understandably into design and art and development and everything else, that is also the same path that marketing follows. And you're already doing it, so you might as well apply some of the marketing methodology to it very early. I am like somewhat known for saying multi-birding all the time. Kill as many birds as you can with that one stone. That is how you become strategic and savvy and yes, scrappy, but like strategic and savvy and successful. So if you can double up on some of what you're already doing and apply that to your marketing, you're already well ahead of how a lot of other studios think and operate and sort of um, address their marketing challenges. And again, this isn't to like criticize any specific studio or person. Most people get into game development for reasons other than marketing your game, other than figuring out how you're going to sell it, how you're going to pitch it, with the
Mhm.
exception maybe of pitching for funding, which is very different than pitching to your consumer audience. I would say that, most developers are just interested in making the best quality product they can, and they're less interested, even the ones who are kind of like into participating, they're just less focused as a priority sequence on all of that sort of like translating things into consumer facing pieces and like media blurbs and promotional bits. um, but the marketing early element is built into every single game design process that I've ever seen. So when I'm brought into a team, and one of the reasons why I preach marketing early and kind of the basis for like making it sort of something that fundamentally everyone should do, is a cost savings initiative. Which again, usually people understand a little bit better than like making money and being famous sometimes. The drive to save money translates for most developers into the ability to extend production or increase scope or add something cool to the game that you didn't think you could. So I think, again, speaking people's language is really important. And perhaps the reason that people don't market early is that they think that marketing comes in the form of like, hey, everybody, let's do TikTok. Instead of like, these assets that you're defining can help me target player audiences and actually develop a community from day one.
Mhm. Isn't
That's
marketing just posting to TikTok though?
it's such an end point of marketing for me, but it
Mhm.
is. And I think like again, there's like marketing is a four-letter word for a reason. There's like really crappy, ugly marketing out there.
Mhm.
And even posting to TikTok comes in like a wide plethora of like varieties. You can see the like spammy kind of clickbaity stuff, and then you can see kind of like the more thoughtful or insightful or at least like well developed stuff.
Mhm.
Um, so I think being intentional, much like when you design a game, right? It's not enough to just like put things in there and just throw them in there and put more and more out there and in there. It has to be thoughtfully designed. It has to be ideally built around a story.
Mhm.
Even if you're not a narrative game, there's some kind of like world something that you're presenting to people. I think good marketing does the exact same thing. And
Mhm.
if you can tie it into the game very closely, especially during development, um, I think it goes a long way. The sort of barrier to some of this, and we've like discussed like AAA versus indie a little bit. AAA has a hard time with this because there's a lot of approvals required to just like initiate marketing. But they do plan internally from day one, so they just kind of like front load some of the strategy and planning so that when they launch it all looks like very elegant. But like they also plan alongside their development processes early on. They can afford to. For indies, I think the reason that like it comes later is just honestly like a bandwidth issue. If you don't have someone
Hmm.
on your team who's doing marketing, everything I'm saying might be like nice to have, but like not possible to
It's
have or not feasible.
exhausting and like overwhelming. Like, oh God, I got to do this too.
Yeah. So
I
I,
know
I
I've been there.
empathize with that entirely, despite everything I just
Yeah.
said.
Before I would love to jump into one of the things I like about this show is that we always leave each episode with a couple of really simple actionable tips that people can apply. Before we get there, I want to like use some scare tactics for a second, and you can change. I don't know. You can define this differently. I want to focus in on why it is so important. What can go wrong, or what do you not get if you don't do marketing from early on, if you aren't thoughtful? What are some of the ways that that really hurts or hinders a team?
I mean, it's a great question, and like, it's not really to be scary. You can succeed despite not having marketing. But I think again, in the interest of like hedging your bets in a very competitive market, there are real reasons for why you don't want to miss out on some opportunities. I think the first and most obvious is around play testing and player feedback. It's really easy to make a game in a bubble, especially not just your development team, but like your friends, your family, your development friends who like might give you advice and maybe it's critical at times, but overall are like overwhelmingly supportive for the most part.
Hmm.
You need to get outside of that bubble as quickly as possible, and marketing can help you find the right types of people to reach out to. Marketing doesn't have to be like making a big public announcement and going broad and wide. It can be very targeted and in private groups or to like select lists of people that you're discovering. Um, and I think all of that, even initially around playtesting, is really important. You'll probably along the way define player personas that you're targeting in your game design. And those same player personas are going to be targeted by your marketing person. So, again, two birds, one stone. Allow them to kind of go out and try to seek out some of the places where those people are talking, engaging with games, discovering games. I don't want to make like light of the work that goes into it, but it's also not rocket science. Like you can go to Reddit and you can find subreddits and you can see people talking. You can like follow YouTube videos and like look in the comment section. It's really, really easy to find and engage with people. Um, and it doesn't require you to do that big public splash reveal announcement. That's why doing
Hmm.
it early is actually helpful. You can fly under the radar and get some focus group feedback. You'll probably bring a lot of those people into your community along the way because most people, like I said, kind of want to make a game, and being asked for their opinion and input is sometimes very meaningful to them. So your early community anchor points will probably be your friends and family, but you want to get outside of that bubble as quickly as possible. The other reason early matters is that there is a lot of stuff that happens during game development that is very hard or annoying, I guess is a better word, to go back and collect afterwards. The best example I have, and the most actionable thing I would have for everybody today, is that when you're collecting like those funny little bugs and those weird little Discord discussions that you and your team have, and like those moments that happen internally during game development and ideation that are funny and cool and connect to the game in a very meaningful way, but the players often never ever see or get to appreciate. You can go back and get that. You can kind of fabricate that a little bit. Like, don't get me wrong, it's possible to go back and meme it, but it's a lot easier if you start off with like a channel that you dump that stuff into. We affectionately call it featured bugs at our studio. But any of that kind of stuff, which players really love to see, it's definitely not going to degrade their impression of the quality of your game. There's like, I often get asked, like, oh, like, do we really want to share these bugs? I'm like, yeah, with context. Maybe you put it against the final version and it looks great, but capturing that stuff early so that whoever's going to do your community management and your marketing doesn't have to like start from nothing is really helpful. It's also good to capture some of that so that you're setting a tonality around the game and around the studio brand. And I know I'm going to talk more about this in like a masterclass, but there's a lot that goes into player trust around a debut project or something that they've never seen from a team before, that can be helped by that early marketing, which is like again sharing bugs, but also maybe things like doing developer diary type content. A lot of people wait to do that until they're invited to a showcase, but like ultimately you kind of want to share that with your community first, not necessarily with the public world. get the feedback from them. If they're harsh, so be it. But the early audiences are really helpful to sort of like measure and connect with that way, both around, yeah, some of like your funnier content and also just some of your direct sort of like player addressing type items, whether it be like
Yeah.
an art choice or a UI screen.
Yeah, I think something I love to talk about with the students at IGA is exactly that. There are so many people who dream of making games who will never touch a game engine or touch a game in their life. These are the numbers that I'm about to say are completely made up, but let's say like 1 out of 10 maybe, like that's probably about accurate, maybe even less, will actually touch a game engine. Because typically gamers are a lot more casual than that. They're going to, play Call of Duty and be like, man, this is so cool. I'd love to work on a game one day. And they never actually will because, it's sort of a fleeting fancy and that's okay. It's not for everybody. But you being involved with a game that they fall in love with, you giving them the opportunity, I should say, to be involved with the game that they fall in love with is suddenly fulfilling that fantasy. It's the same as fulfilling a fantasy in a game. If they feel like they can give feedback and that the developer is actually listening, talking, communicating with them, suddenly their dreams are coming true because they get to be a part of your process. And I
Totally.
think a lot of devs are like scared of that because then they get involved and they give you their thoughts and they give you their feedback and there's definitely more to manage. Community management is not something to sleep on. um, but it also, yeah, it is just a really powerful way to get a group of people excited about a project and to get you excited about a project. Like the first time you receive is the first time somebody makes some fan art or the first time somebody like gives you an idea that you're like, oh my god, that's perfect, or whatever, um, gives you the developer so much more energy and excitement. So I think this is one of those reasons that marketers are game developers. Why is that a question? Because they're a part of the process. They are in some ways a direct line of communication to your users. It's good to have them in a room and have them go like, I posted this, and this, and it didn't really work out. I was trying to post something like this, and it seemed like people were really excited. I think this is actually what's getting people excited. Having that voice is also incredibly valuable as well. So give us you gave us a couple of these tips here. The I love, by the way, the concept of multi-birding. How do you make sure you are constantly getting multiple birds with that one stone? I love the concept of featured bugs. I think especially in the indie space, there is almost no reason to hide your flaws. People
Lean
love
into
it.
it.
Um,
Yeah, they really
yeah,
do, and they're very forgiving of it
yeah.
too, as long as it's not in the, like, final product that breaks their player experience, mind you. They actually love seeing that, like, underdog achievement type of story, so, like, "We had this, we
Hmm.
couldn't fix it, and we did. You look like heroes," right?
Yes. For that matter, actually, your marketing is the story. You are the little hero in this little story. So give us some of those other tips. What are the actionable tips? How do we, as developers, get efficient? How do we multi-bird? How do we build out an awesome game that people actually want and get involved in?
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on sort of the early stuff, which is involving your audience and understanding too that giving them that like vicarious experience of developing alongside you does in no way obligate you, or based on how you frame it to them, should in no way obligate you to actually do what they say. You
Mhm.
can like still do anything else. I use a famous example of asking players about like two color options. And in the final game, they could just pick whatever color they wanted. It's like that was never like actually up for debate. Haha. But I think like creating those
Gotcha.
moments with your, yeah, but that is definitely a way to again build trust and build engagement along the way. And once you have a community engaged, marketing I think becomes easier to justify. For better or worse, people still like to see how many followers you have, and they like to see how active people are around a post. And if you're not going to pay to juice that, as I wouldn't really recommend doing that, not as an indie, anyways. Your money is better, or your money and time is better spent trying to engage with people organically and get them excited about what you're posting. The reason that the multi-birding comes into play early on as well is that there's going to be opportunities for you to get not just organic engagement from creators, influencers in your community, but like promotion, like editorial promotion from them. They might want to put you on a stream. They might want to interview you. They might want to invite you to be in a showcase. Ideally, your marketing positions you and your studio as someone who's like ready for those opportunities. That's part of why people say, like, how active do we need to be? In truth, like, yeah, posting every day is very nice if you have that bandwidth. but it's more important to set expectations and make sure that people know how to find you and where to find you and what you're doing. So if your last post is something like going head down into development, see you in a month, cool. Now people know exactly what's going on. Sign up for our newsletter. Yeah, don't forget that. Put a call to action at the end.
Hmm.
So I do think that early marketing does not have to require some of those like massive community management commitments either, as long as
Hmm.
you're setting expectations and, you know, obviously communicating with people when things are happening. Um, to do it all at once, ideally you have someone on your team who likes this stuff, okay? Like if you don't like self-promotion, and many people are very uncomfortable with self-promotion, like even me in a weird way, like I like championing other people's stuff. That's great. My comfort zone is right there. I've never had a booth for my own company, let's put it that way. But for my dev studio, sure, no problem. Um, so I do think you need someone who likes being that kind of mouthpiece. And if it's not someone on your dev team, finding someone, even if they're going to be like an intern type scenario or part-timer or whatever, that
Hmm.
energy and that kind of attitude is important. You do need someone who's going to like sell you in a sense. And you know, bearing in mind that currently you're not asking for people's money. You're asking them for their engagement and interest and time and attention. In many ways that requires you to like kind of be even more of a personality who promotes. That's very true when it comes to like, you know, the AAAs. They usually have those camera facing people who will come on and just talk about the game like endlessly. So if you don't have that in your studio, I suggest looking for someone who might fill that role or talking amongst yourselves and seeing who might be interested in that. If you truly don't have anybody, again, like marketing people can be hired part time. It might be helpful though, because if you're not touting your own worth along the way, um, when people do finally discover you or they do look you up, anyways, you really want them to see not just you talking about yourself, but other people talking about you as well. And that's kind of what marketing will put a fire to. Um, and we mentioned like fan art and some other cool rewards. A lot of this will come back, I think, as motivation for the team, whether it's getting positive feedback or just seeing like your follower number go up. It does feel nice to believe that you're gaining your audience ahead of time. It's partially proof of concept, of course, but you know, on a small team that's doing this is not their full-time job, I think that can be, yeah, to Willem's point, like pretty powerful. So doing it all at once and all together is challenging, but I think also rewarding. And if you can't find someone to champion that on your team, it might be worth the investment to
Hmm.
push the project along and also eventually to be positioned to take advantage of those like really cool things that will come your way. Um,
Yeah.
Showcases, Summer Game Fest, all that good stuff coming up. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a so in our Foundry program, which is our brand new publishing arm, we now require that each team have one person on the team that this is their whole job. And that is something that I largely believe in, even if you don't have a budget, because so many indies, you know, are working off of a next to zero budget. Even if you don't have a budget, there is revenue share, there is deferred payment, there is just straight up volunteer opportunities. Sometimes you can ask people to give a certain amount of time just for the experience and for the credit. And that is not only normal, but expected in a lot of cases. Pay people whenever you can, please. This is not an excuse to not pay people. But for those who don't have money, you can still have a person like this who's pretty competent on your team.
Yeah,
Now,
and bear in mind too,
yeah.
if you don't have the money for it, there are other options. Like if you were to seek out a publisher or an investor, a lot of times marketing becomes part of that service as well. So
Mhm.
there's many paths to achieving marketing early on here. Yeah.
100%. So I wanna have one. I'm gonna get one more thing from you, and then we're gonna go into community questions. So the last thing I wanna pick your brain about is it's remarkable how much having a marketer on your team affects the team at large. You kind of touched upon morale basically. If you have a marketer who's going out there and sort of like showing like, oh look, people are interested. Oh look, people are excited. Look at how well this posted. Oh my god, that went viral or semi-viral or whatever. That's actually a tremendous way to just keep your team excited, especially in those low budget teams where people aren't really making money. Longevity is like one of the toughest things. It's really easy to fall apart, have a team go nowhere because people just get burnt out. So a marketer is actually a really powerful tool for morale, in my opinion. Now, the so we've touched upon a couple of those things. The part that we haven't really touched upon is what we're delivering to our users. So, what is it that our marketing is giving our community? Um, how should we be structuring what we post and put out there to give them something?
I mean, I think trying to empathize with the reason why they've come to you is really important because your community is not going to be all made up of the same people. We're pretty cognizant of that when like press or somebody reaches out to us, like, oh, like what do they need and what do they want, and we'll get it to them. I would say creators and different tiers of creators also have different needs. They may want like slightly earlier access to things than other people. They may want direct access to developers to ask questions. And then your community at large, ideally, you can also bucket them out to better serve their needs. So typically in a game, you'll have a few like different hooks that you're using to pull people in. And it is
Hmm.
really important to remember that if you're promoting several hooks, you need to like satisfy the people who are looking for those things from your game. So if you're going to feature, for example, art as like a main thing in your development process, make sure that you remember that people joined your community because they probably saw that art stuff that was very highly art focused, and you'll probably want to speak to them in their own special way. Sometimes that can just be like things that you're running in contests. Sometimes it can be some of the DevOps behind the scenes stuff, or like work in progress type of reveals. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's more about the types of creators and players that you're actually going to bring and feature in the community. I see this often with game mechanics. So people who are really trying to show off a game mechanic will sort of spend a lot of time talking about it and explaining it from the dev's point of view, but they forget to like get a player testimonial to like really hit that home for their community. Some of the community doesn't care about you. They joined because they care about you, but we all know the influence of outside opinion and how like, you know, what people think matters. Like that kind of like premise is really important to remember when you're trying to give your community reasons to fall in love with your game. You can't just
Hmm.
I recognize I'm coming from marketing here, so this is ironic, but you can't just sell, sell, sell to them all the time. You have to find other ways to engage with them and make them feel meaningful. I do think that to touch on morale and team morale and community morale consecutively, it is important to make your brand look like it is organized and like I guess like run efficiently in a sense. You don't want to like take yourself too casually because eventually you're going to ask people for money, and even initially you're asking them for trust and time. And for your team, especially around a morale basis here, to engage them as much as they're willing or interested in external opportunities to promote not just the game, but themselves alongside the game. I'm a big believer in that. So, you know, as a marketing person, I'm always pushing my teams to like submit to GDC as a speaker, submit to Game Devs of Color as a speaker, put this
Hmm.
into the showcase. Let's get you into your local event. Let's get you at that like pub game dev meetup because like you should be speaking there. I really think, regardless of how much experience you have in the industry, getting those ideas out and having the public see those ideas be received in different ways, even if they don't really understand the game industry, really makes an
Hmm.
impression. And, you know, let's not lie, optically, it makes the game look cooler and more important, and like you need to buy it when it comes out.
Hmm.
So massaging that branding and kind of making sure that your community is seeing the value in your team as well as the project, I think is a really smart way to go, and how a lot of indies again get an edge over AAA because it's
Hmm.
harder to do that with your teams in AAA.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. You are as much of the story as the game itself is, I think, especially in indie. Because we have an inherent like love for the underdog story. And the minute you're indie, the minute you're an underdog right away. And so being a
Yeah,
part of that,
sadly.
yeah. So a part of that process, a part of that, a part of what's important to know is that, you are the story. You and your team and the game are the story. And we as humans like crave connection, crave being a part of something, crave authenticity. And if you're delivering that to those people, then we're only going to come out on top.
Absolutely.
All right. We're going to jump into some community questions. So the first one is from Joker of Aces. Joker asked me to ask for them. The question is, with friends, family, and fellow developers, how valuable is having people test the game when they are not part of your intended audience and might not even like the game?
I mean, you definitely want to test with people who are unlikely to like the game because they might give you more
Hmm.
honest feedback. It's really easy to be distracted by like a genre or an art style that you love and then be like super forgiving about things that people will pick up on.
Hmm.
I do think it's always good to position your players, whoever it is, who are going to be giving you feedback around like something that you want them to focus on. Because unless you're doing like a broad play test at a convention or something where it's like getting into the hands of like 100 people at a time, You probably are trying to discover something in that playtest, and it should be designed appropriately. Friends and family, it's not that like they're not worth testing with. I just feel like they need even more of that direction. It's like, okay, like we changed the menu, and I'm not going to tell you anything else, but afterwards I'm going to ask you how you felt the menu worked. It's also really easy, I think, to with developers get feedback that is like just not within scope or like maybe not appropriate to your project. So developers will kind of think about it in terms of like having endless resources often.
Hmm.
Whereas your friends and family will think about it in terms of like things that can't even really be done in a game. Like they'll just like throw out crazy ideas. So that's where sort of the grain of salt comes into play for me. It's understanding that like when I'm testing with people who know me well, they're probably going to tell me things that are maybe less meaningful and broad strokes because they don't want to hurt my feelings. And if I make them focus on something tight, then they might give me slightly more meaningful feedback. However, I will say once you have a demo and you want to like get a demo out to the public, just throw it in everybody's hands. Because they'll tell you quickly if there's any problems, especially with like tutorialization and things like that. I think that's where those broader tests become more meaningful. Whereas your early play testing, when you're trying to like hone in on different elements of your game, you probably want to set out some parameters around the playtest itself.
Mm. I love that you didn't just say no or didn't just say yes for that matter. You had a thoughtful response. I do think that there's a ton of nuance to this question actually. Early on for the earliest on, test with everybody. There's no reason not to. It's not a bad play test to play with somebody who wouldn't play this game. And in fact, it's really valuable for a couple of reasons because one, as you suggest, Karina, they tend to be more honest if they kind of feel less of a personal stake in the project. Your main We have a whole lecture in level 3 about how your main enemy in playtesting is bias. People will tell you what they think you want to hear. People will be nice and placate you. People will also just get misled by you. Actually, that's what happens the most often. And so having that honesty is actually super valuable. No playtest is a bad playtest. No feedback is bad feedback unless they are deliberately trolling or something. And so getting feedback from those people who may not be your perfect testers is good for that reason. It's also good because sometimes you're wrong about who your game is for. Um, if you might discover, wow, seems like older players actually love this. Let me figure out why. Maybe it's worth considering that, or maybe this is even an indication of some large pivot or something.
I
So
will
still useful.
suggest very
Yeah.
quickly that a marketing
Yes.
person is very good at analyzing sentiment and translating it into action. And if you're a
Mm.
developer who doesn't like hearing super negative people, or it's just like it kind of like grinds your gears, allow your sentiment analyst, which is typically your marketing or maybe community director, to
Mm.
kind of translate it for you. Because someone saying like this blows, it doesn't work, could also mean something else. But I do find it can be really hard to hear that feedback raw. So
Mm.
don't feel bad if you like assign someone that job. It's very much like getting reviews on your game or something. Like everything kind of needs to be analyzed through a bias lens, and
Mm.
sometimes repositioning that can make it just more meaningful for your team. It's hard to hear negativity, and honestly, it's hard to hear saccharine positivity too. I like
Yeah.
something that I can do something about, right?
Honest. Yes. I love that. That's really good. I like that as an answer. Sorry for hearing pounding, by the way. There's construction on my house right now. All right, we've got Rick up on stage for the second question. Rick, would you like to take us away?
Sure. So my question is about the compilation of marketing material. So as you go throughout the development process, you're going to need content to post, to share with your community. So how do you enlist the help of your team that's developing to give you that content? Like if I'm an engineer and I make something and there's a funny bug, but then I just fix it and I don't record it, you don't have that content. So like what are ways with different members of the team that you can get them to help you? And like what's like a good form to compile that? A Dropbox or um, yeah.
It's a great question. Yeah. I mean, truthfully, everyone works a little bit differently. And because I'm asking them to do something extra, I'm quite cognizant of that. And I try to work with what they're comfortable with. So I have people who, while they're working, will do screen recordings. They don't want to like pick out clips of funny stuff. What they'll do is they'll just link me to that day's screen recording and they'll say, oh, at this time, this happened, check it out. And then it's kind of my job to go and collect it. Other people, as you mentioned, are cool with like a form or something where they can just drop things in quickly with minimal context, but like enough for us to reuse it. We currently use a Discord channel just because it's like a nice catch-all, so you can put like anything you want in there basically. But I do think that being proactive about that is like the key. So you have to like let people know that there's like a hope and an expectation that that's going to happen. Set up a process that you feel like they're likely to use, so like there's low friction, and make it different for everybody. Like I have people who don't like recording bugs for various reasons. It's just like personally they don't want to show that. So I ask for different things from them. Some of them are really good at finding memes. Like it kind of depends on where they spend their time and what they do. I really try very hard, just like with a customer facing thing, with my team, I try to think of like how they like to operate and how I can get like the best out of them. And for marketing, understanding that it's not their like primary prerogative, I think is really critical. You have to just like complement what they're doing. I mentioned like submitting to GDC. For some of my team, they don't like capturing bugs, but they were very interested in speaking at GDC. I'm like, great, I can promote the shit out of that. Sorry. Yeah, whatever. We're all adults. But yeah, like I do think you have to get creative sometimes. The simplest thing in the development process to capture from a marketing standpoint is some of the especially from the art team, is some of the concept art and things that often get like buried on their hard drive, trying to pull that out and make it public. So working on a Miro board, having a Notion page where everyone just chucks stuff. As I said, it's not necessarily it has to be tidy or organized. I can go back and do that. But getting access to it and getting like their sudden brain thought about something quickly shared is the hardest part. So you just got to set up systems.
Right.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, it sounds like it's just about giving people that little inkling to be aware that they're generating marketing content and to put it somewhere that you can go through it with the comb.
Yeah, and I think understanding what they can provide based on the limitations of whatever they have to focus on that day or in
Yeah.
general. So like I rarely ask our designers, for example, who are like really busy and head down to record TikTok videos. It just wouldn't make sense.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, but if they ever
Yeah,
want
there's a
to,
if they ever want to. That's what I was going to add to this, which is on the teams that I've been a part of. There's almost always individuals who wind up being a big part of the marketing contribution, for various reasons, either because their work really lends to it or because they just like to do it. So I think the first thing you said there was just make a process. So have somewhere where you can drop content as you take it. If you have a cute screenshot, you put it in this folder and the marketing department will use it. That's one of the first things for all of you to do. But in addition, I think you'll sort of find over time that various team members are both proficient and desire to be a part of the marketing process. And if nobody wants that, then obviously you'll have to work on that a little bit. But oftentimes there'll be a couple of people who are like, "Man, I just love writing up stuff about what I created," or "I love like when I was at Paradox, I loved making tutorial videos, getting people set up with how to use our tools. That was a ton of fun. That was something I volunteered to do." You'll find those people who get excited to contribute.
okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Um, yeah, thank you, Rick. All right, second question from Robert Meeks, or third question, I should say. Robert says, "How do you market your game if you're early in the process and very few assets are implemented so far?"
Yeah, it's always scary to even if you have like a number of assets, if they're not finalized or you're still kind of like going over them, it can be scary to put that out there. I do think you need to think clearly about your game's initial sort of like pitch, elevator pitch. What's the thing that people were supposed to get excited about, and the thing that you got excited about when you decided to make this game? That doesn't always require something visual that you've created to accompany it. It's like an imperfect example because I recognize it's a genre niche, but a horror game and like PvP style horror games often borrow from famous horror IPs. That's like a no-brainer. So a few of the games that I've started that were sort of in that genre that did not have any assets that they were comfortable sharing early on, leaned hard into just other people's creations. Just share your favorite stuff that you know psychographically maps over your audience. And psychographically meaning just things that people like believe in and care about and like kind of motivate fans rather than demographics, which is like age, language, stuff like that. Um, if you can just tap into things that you know your audience already associates with and cares about when you put your game out there to them eventually, because at some point you'll be comfortable and have stuff to post, You just want to make sure again that the story makes sense. It's like, oh, you were priming me to expect this, and it fulfilled my expectations, and I'm excited to see more. Like it just has to fit nicely into the story that you've built. But I do feel like developers put way too much of a burden and emphasis on creating original content on a regular basis in order to start your marketing. You don't have to start there. Truthfully, the earliest marketing that I've done, like when people brought me in and said, like, we have a budget, go nuts, are things like building a Reddit account and starting to build up karma by interacting with content that's in those subgenres that the player personas are gonna be interested in. Making like private Facebook groups a priority and joining a whole bunch of those and kind of lurking and researching what those people are talking about, looking for like weird events that we might tap into. So all of that stuff, again, like not everyone sees that as direct marketing because you're not putting stuff out to the fans directly, but it's all part of your strategy. And there's a lot of content that's free use or can be shared in from other accounts. There's no shame in that game whatsoever at all. And at some point, like I said, you will pivot to your own content, and that will, like hopefully seem like a natural progression to anyone who's following you.
Amazing. I also think you can, I mean, there's so much that you can post that you might not think you can post, like even just like an organizational chart that shows off your core loop or something like that. Are you against showing something that early stage?
I don't think it's bad to show it as long as you have context for it. My biggest concern
Hmm.
is when you're setting expectations for players and then those expectations need to change dramatically. So scope is always a
Mm.
dangerous thing. People will say like, "How long is the game supposed to be?" And it's like, don't want to answer that yet. So I think as long as you're presenting it in a way that's honest, so you just don't want to have
Mhm.
to like backpedal or like pivot too hard. And you're presenting it in terms of the production state that the game is at, because that's about setting expectations as well. Like how soon might it come out, whatever. You don't have to answer those questions with a fine point, but you should be able to tell people like we're iterating on this right now, or we're working on a playable prototype. It doesn't really matter how long honestly you take to develop a game if you're honest about the stage that you're at. The trouble that developers run into is when they, promise and under deliver, or promise and then like have to dramatically change what the player is actually going to receive. So I
Mm.
think that's where the danger lies in showing things too early. However, if you're giving context and you're saying this is something we're thinking about, we haven't settled on, or we've brainstormed this and maybe it'll be part of the game. Like as long as you're kind of being open about that ideation process, I still think people like to see it and there is still a lot that you can share.
Mm.
Introducing your team early is also a bit of a risk because of the retention issue that we talked about. But I will say that teams like to be recognized early too. And if you're open to it, again, team members can change, but involving them in the process, that's another piece of content that you kind of do have at your disposal.
Mm.
So yeah, it's not dangerous. I just think you want to make sure that you're again like promising or sorry, delivering on whatever you're promising to your community.
Mhm. And not making promises that are gonna change dramatically, potentially shift who you're even targeting, things like that.
Yeah, I
Just
mean,
being cautious about what you're saying.
they won't care about you committing to something early on. They'll care about you
Mhm.
delivering on whatever you have committed to. So
Mhm,
don't
mhm.
feel the rush to like again, like early marketing does not have to be this like polished, established product that you're selling. You're kind of selling a vibe and a studio and like an idea
Mhm.
initially.
Alright,
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question. I think we'll do probably, we're gonna do one more question here, and then I have 2 very rapid fire ones for you, and then we'll finish.
Sure.
So Kevin's question, this one is just really interesting to me, and I'm very curious what you will answer. Kevin asks, "Do you push for prioritizing features that are effective in marketing content?" So, do
I
you push for adding things to the game that will market real good, even if they aren't necessarily, a great piece of game design or whatever?
I do think much like early marketing having to work in tandem with the production process and not disrupt it, any
Mhm,
marketing sort of initiatives have to sort of work the same way. Mostly because indie budgets are tight already. If there's enough budget to allocate to those features, very cool. The one that comes up often are things like Twitch integrations, which is like
mhm,
basically a marketing feature. Or cosmetic items in game or player characterization and customization. All of those things are not inherently necessary for the game experience, but are kind of like nice to haves. I do think that marketing, the best marketing, doesn't ask the game to put extra stuff in. It looks at what the game is, assuming the game is, designed intentionally, and it figures out clever ways to leverage those things because that is how you keep your costs normal. It's just like such a luxury to put some of those things in game, and even when developers do prioritize those items, in my experience, it usually comes at the expense of something else. And I think you
Mm.
really have to ask yourself if that marketing feature is adding to the player experience that you're delivering or just being used as like a gimmicky thing. It's really easy to make gimmicky things about anything. Doesn't have to be
I'm
something new.
curious. Yeah, well, so I'm curious, like, the specific example I'm thinking of, Aggro Crab, which I think
Yeah,
masterclass in
it was
in indie
great.
marketing. They had Aggro Crab, another Crab's Treasure. For anybody who doesn't know, is a Souls like under the water. You're controlling Sebastian and you fight a bunch of monsters.
Yeah.
Um, they added a shell that was literally a handgun, and I think the whole reason they added it, they did add it as like it makes the game easier. I think you can like win instantly with it or something. But
Mhm.
regardless, it feels like the reason they added it because they know it was memeable and silly and ridiculous and would do well on TikTok.
Yes.
So that kind of thing. Would you
I
add
mean,
content just for the memes?
so that game in particular is kind of a juicy
Mhm.
example because that game is memes. Like that's the whole like shtick that they built on social, and I really like the way Paige, their community manager, runs things. So this is not like a
Mhm.
slight. I think it's a fit for the game. It doesn't feel like a disingenuous add-on. It doesn't feel gimmicky because the game
Mm.
already has that gimmicky factor to it. So I do think in the interest of, addressing this question broadly for like any game that might be thinking about putting marketing assets or sorry, marketing elements or features into the game, things that you know are
Mhm.
likely to sell, but are maybe not necessary to the core experience. Make sure it fits with the game. Make sure it fits with the brand. Make sure that your consumers will not immediately smell that marketing crap, because that is, I think, where you lose people. And Fortnite is an interesting example too here because they obviously brand themselves out wazoo. They
Mhm.
have different levels of reception to things that they put in the game. And if you look at it, the ones that tend to be well received are either really funny and interesting, or they've been tied in somehow meaningfully, even to just a creator or streamer who's interested in Fortnite. Those are the things that people
Mhm.
tend to think are really cool. The brand ones that are just thrown in and forced in, it's not that people don't like them and engage with them. It still does marketing, but the value to the consumer is perceived a little bit differently. And as an indie, I would just encourage you to, you have a small team and you have the freedom to design things intentionally, within that small team, including your marketing team. So design it all intentionally. Just make it cool. Make it fit. If you can surprise and delight people with that kind of gimmick, it's great. But if people cringe at it, it was a waste of money and might get you the wrong kind of attention. Um,
Love that.
it's again, I do think it's like not something that I would necessarily sacrifice other elements of the game for, but maybe it
Mhm.
can be woven into what you're designing if marketing is done early.
Nice. Great tie in there. Awesome. All right, so it's definitely time for us to end the episode. I've held you a couple of minutes extra because I always learn so much from you, Karina. For those who are live here in the audience, Karina is running one of our master classes this weekend. The master classes, for those who are listening after the fact, are up on our Eventbrite. You can find our Eventbrite links. They are 4-hour workshops with advanced teachers. So for those who might want to come learn from Karina, we have a masterclass this weekend. So, Karina, it's time for us to end the episode. We always do two things here before we do that. First things first, what is some homework that we can assign to the audience that'll take about an hour for them to complete and will help them practice some of what we talked about here today?
So there's two things that probably will collectively take up an hour, but they go together. So the first one is to claim all of your social media accounts if you haven't already, even if you're not going to start marketing anytime soon. And you've heard this from me before if you've ever heard me teach, but go squat on them all everywhere. The worst thing that could happen is that you blow up your game and then someone else gets to take advantage of it for you. IP is a hard thing to fight for. The other part of that is with some of the accounts, and maybe just cherry pick a couple places that you think you want to be active based on your audiences. Follow a few people who align themselves with your game. It could be other developers who you know have made a similar game. That's a great place to start. It could be an
Mhm.
influencer that you know plays your types of games, or it could just be someone who's like a celebrity but kind of vibes with your game in a certain way. See what kind of stuff they're posting. Start to think about what your community is seeing when they engage with other accounts. Because both of those things, both being present and owning your own name so they can find you, and having a good sense of how to talk to your early followers, is a really easy positioning place for your game to start with marketing.
Hmm. Okay, take over a bunch of accounts. That sounds about right. And then what is the second half of that?
So the second half of that is, I think, making sure that if you're ready and when you're ready to start doing some
Mhm.
kind of early posting to let people know what your intentions are for the game. It does not have to be the
Okay.
full pitch or any kind of key art. It can be kind of like jokey too if you're like, "Hi, we're new and we're making a game." But establish yourself on at least one platform early on. It will again make you feel good when people start finding and engaging with you to have that place to go. But also, if your team is comfortable, maybe you can start posting some stuff there about what you're doing, either on your current project or on the project that you're kind of planning out. It's literally never too early to post.
Love it. Awesome. So homework for this week. This is an actionable one. Everybody should do this. Go and squat on some accounts. Take over accounts either for your studio or for your game. There's a bit of consideration there. And then start posting and post a little bit about what you're building over time and what you are excited to create. What your vibe is. I liked you using that word earlier. You're selling a vibe. All right. At the end of the episode here, Karina, any last words of wisdom you would like to give or anything you would like to plug?
I mean, much love to marketers, and it's definitely a part of game development. If you're a developer who's interested in marketing stuff, you can be a huge asset to your team. So I'll just leave you with that. We're definitely like an underserved part of the industry. So if this kind of makes you curious, I'm easy to find, Core Karina anywhere. And as far as plugging, I mean, hopefully I'll see some of you at the masterclass this weekend. I'm really excited to talk about marketing and funding and all that kind of
Mhm.
good stuff. And yeah, Wishlist All Systems Dance. It's our new dance battle adventure game, and it's coming out in 2025.
Heck yeah, support your fellows indies. Check out All Systems Dance. We will put links to that down below, by the way. Awesome. So for those who are in the room, we'd love to see you in the masterclass. For those who are listening after the fact, go and wishlist that game. You can check out links in the description down below. Karina, thank you as always. You've always been such a value to us, and I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure. I love being here. Great stuff you've got going
Eh,
on.
Thank you. Yes. All right. And thank you to those who were in the space. And thank you to those who asked questions. We always appreciate this. As always, we'll be here every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. So we will see you in the next one.
Game over.